They laughed before he even spoke. A towering man, nearly 2 meters tall, looking down at Bruce Lee with open amusement, arms crossed, confident, dismissive. "You're too small," he said. Not as an insult whispered in private, but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Fighters, students, onlookers, all witnesses. Bruce Lee didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He simply nodded, calm, still. 4 seconds later, the laughter stopped. The room went silent, and the man who mocked him understood something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Size means nothing when you don't understand speed, timing, and reality. Hong Kong, late 1960s. A private training hall, not glamorous, not famous, just a functional space with wooden floors, mirrors lining the walls, the faint smell of sweat and incense in the air. Bruce Lee is already known, but not yet the global icon he will become. To many traditional martial artists, he is controversial, too modern, too outspoken, too different, and to some, far too small to be taken seriously. On this particular day, visitors have come to observe his training. Among them is a man who stands out immediately, almost 2 meters tall, thick shoulders, long arms, a physique built to intimidate without effort. He watches Bruce teach, watches him move, watches students half his size struggle to keep up with the pace, and he smirks. In his world, fights are decided before they start. Height, reach, mass. These are the laws he believes in. He has won fights simply by stepping forward and letting his opponent feel overwhelmed. To him, Bruce Lee looks like a technician pretending to be a fighter. Impressive movements, yes. Fast hands, sure. But small, too small. When Bruce finishes demonstrating a sequence, the giant speaks up. His voice is casual, almost bored. "Your techniques are interesting," he says, "but they wouldn't work on someone my size." A few people glance at Bruce, waiting. Bruce turns toward him, attentive, respectful. "Why do you think that?" he asks. The man laughs softly. "Because you wouldn't be able to reach me. Because one hit from me would end it. Because in a real fight, size always wins." There it is. The challenge. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. The air in the room tightens. Bruce studies the man's posture, the way his weight rests on his heels, the confidence leaning just a little too far into arrogance. Bruce nods again. "You're probably right," he says. And that response confuses everyone, especially the giant. He expected resistance, ego, defensiveness. Instead, Bruce steps closer, closing the distance the man thought protected him. "Let's test it," Bruce says calmly. "Just lightly. No injuries." The giant shrugs. He has nothing to lose. This will be a demonstration, not a fight. A chance to prove a point in front of everyone. He agrees. They stand facing each other. No stance, no dramatic setup. Bruce looks relaxed, almost casual. The giant looks amused. Someone starts counting down, half joking. Before they reach 2, it's over. In less than 4 seconds, the giant feels something he cannot process. A sudden shift, a sharp disruption of balance, pressure at the neck, a sensation of falling without understanding how it began. His back hits the floor hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. He blinks, stunned, staring up at the ceiling. Bruce Lee is already stepping back, hands relaxed at his sides. Silence. No cheers. No laughter. Just shock. The giant sits up slowly, confusion written across his face. He didn't feel pain first. He felt loss of control. His size never entered the equation. His strength never activated. He never even saw the movement that put him on the ground. Bruce looks down at him, not triumphantly, but thoughtfully. "You're right," Bruce says softly. "Size matters, but only if you can use it." The giant doesn't reply. He doesn't need to. The lesson has already landed. The room doesn't move for several seconds. No one rushes to help. No one speaks. The giant remains seated on the floor, one hand planted behind him, the other resting on his knee, breathing slowly as his mind tries to catch up with his body. He is not hurt. That is what confuses him most. No punch landed, no strike burned, no pain announced what had happened. Yet he is on the ground, exactly where he never imagined he could be, looking up at a man he believed he could dominate effortlessly. Bruce Lee watches him carefully, not with satisfaction, not with arrogance, with curiosity, with the calm attention of someone observing a completed experiment. He offers the giant a hand. The giant hesitates for a fraction of a second, then takes it. Bruce's grip is firm but light, guiding rather than pulling. When the giant stands, he realizes something unsettling. Bruce never strained, never braced, never relied on strength. The movement that put him down felt inevitable, as if his own body had decided to betray him. Again? Bruce asks. Not as a challenge, as an invitation. The giant nods, slower this time. The confidence that walked into the room has thinned. He squares his shoulders, plants his feet wider, trying to feel solid. He lifts his hands. This time, he intends to use his reach. This time, he will not underestimate the man in front of him. Bruce adjusts nothing. No stance change, no visible preparation. He simply looks at the giant's eyes, then at his shoulders, then at his feet. The giant steps forward, throwing a long, heavy punch, the kind meant to end conversations. Bruce is gone. Not backward, not sideways. He disappears into the space the giant didn't know existed. The punch cuts through empty air. Before the giant can retract his arm, Bruce's forearm is against his throat, not striking, just there. Present, a reminder. Bruce releases him immediately and steps away. "You're strong," Bruce says. "But you move like you expect people to respect your size." The words sting more than any blow. The giant exhales sharply. He has trained for years. He has sparred men larger than Bruce, faster than Bruce, more aggressive than Bruce. None of that prepared him for this feeling. The feeling of being late. Of reacting instead of acting. Of being seen before he even moves. Others in the room begin to shift. They lean forward. They stop pretending this is casual. They understand now that something important is happening. Not a fight. A dismantling. Bruce gestures for the giant to attack again. This time, the giant tries to rush, uses momentum, uses weight, tries to overwhelm. Bruce meets him halfway, not with force, but with angle. A small redirection, a foot placed where the giant's foot wants to land. Gravity does the rest. The giant stumbles, barely catching himself from falling again. 3 attempts, 3 failures. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just undeniable. The giant's breathing changes, not from exertion, from uncertainty. His world has rules. Those rules are breaking in front of him, and he doesn't know how to fix them. He lowers his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in confusion. "I don't understand," he says. His voice is quieter now. "I'm bigger. I'm stronger. I should be able to stop you." Bruce nods. "You are bigger. You are stronger. But you are slow where it matters. You commit before you observe. You rely on intimidation instead of timing. You believe reach is control." Bruce steps closer, close enough that the giant can feel his presence without being threatened by it. "Control is not about size," Bruce continues. "It's about awareness." The giant listens now. Truly listens. The mockery is gone. The dismissive smile erased. In its place is something unfamiliar. Respect mixed with embarrassment. Bruce explains without lecturing, demonstrating with small movements, barely perceptible shifts of weight, subtle changes in distance. He shows how the giant's height creates openings. How long limbs take longer to recover. How power without precision becomes predictable. At one point, Bruce asks the giant to simply stand still. "Do nothing," he says. Bruce moves around him, touching his shoulder, his elbow, his back, each contact light, precise, unavoidable. "Every one of these," Bruce says, "could end a fight, but only if you arrive before your opponent expects you." The giant nods slowly. The lesson sinks in not as humiliation, but as revelation. He realizes something painful and liberating at the same time. He has been winning not because he understood fighting, but because others feared him. Against someone who does not fear size, he has nothing left. Bruce steps back and smiles faintly. 4 seconds, he says. "That's all it took because the outcome was decided before you moved." The giant bows his head slightly. Not formally, instinctively. A gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance. The room exhales collectively. What began as ridicule has become instruction. Bruce turns back to the class. Training resumes, but everyone knows they have witnessed something they will talk about for years. The giant stays. He doesn't leave in anger. He stays and watches. And in that silence, his understanding grows. He did not lose because he was weak. He lost because he believed the wrong things. The training hall feels different after that. Not louder, not more intense, quieter, focused. as if the air itself has learned something and decided to pay attention. The giant moves to the side of the room and watches, no longer with folded arms or amused detachment, but with the posture of someone trying to understand a language he has never heard spoken correctly before. Bruce continues teaching as if nothing extraordinary has happened. That, in itself, leaves an impression. There is no victory speech, no reminder of what just occurred. The lesson has already been delivered. As students cycle through drills, the giant begins to notice patterns he had ignored before. How Bruce never stands where he can be easily measured. How distance constantly shifts, expanding and collapsing without warning. How Bruce's movements are economical, stripped of anything unnecessary. No wasted gestures, no preparation that gives intention away. Everything happens just late enough to be invisible and just early enough to be unstoppable. At one point, Bruce demonstrates interception. He asks a student to throw a straight punch. The punch never completes. Bruce's hand moves first, not to block, but to occupy the space the punch needs to exist. The student freezes, confused. Bruce explains that speed is not about moving fast, but about arriving before the opponent's decision becomes action. The giant's eyes narrow. He realizes how often his own attacks announce themselves, how his size forces him to travel longer distances, creating time he never accounted for. During a short break, the giant approaches Bruce again. His voice is different now, careful. Respectful. "You didn't use strength on me," he says. Bruce shakes his head. "I used your strength," he replies. "You gave me everything I needed." The words land hard. The giant thinks back to every moment he leaned into his mass, every time he trusted intimidation to carry him forward. He sees now how predictable that made him. Bruce gestures for him to step forward again. This time, not to spar, but to learn. Bruce positions him in front of a mirror. "Watch yourself," he says. The giant raises his hands. Bruce asks him to throw a punch in slow motion. As he does, Bruce points out the micro movements, the shoulder lift, the shift of weight, the tightening of the jaw. "All of these are signals," Bruce says. "You tell me what you're about to do before you do it." The giant feels exposed. Not physically, mentally. His body has habits. Those habits speak. Bruce then throws a punch of his own, stopping it inches from the giant's face. There was no warning, no visible signal. It simply appeared. The giant flinches despite himself. Bruce lowers his hand. "Be like water," he says. Formless. Without warning, without commitment until the moment arrives. That phrase stays with the giant. He has heard sayings before. Philosophical slogans meant to sound wise. This is different. This is practical. Applied. He understands now that Bruce is not dismissing power or size. He is reorganizing them, teaching when and how they matter. Teaching restraint before expression, control before dominance. Other students begin to ask questions about larger opponents, about real fights, about what happens when strength meets precision. Bruce answers without exaggeration. He explains that size can be an advantage, but only when guided by awareness. Without it, size becomes inertia, something that must be overcome even by the person who possesses it. The giant listens to every word. He sees his past fights differently now. The moments he won quickly, the moments he struggled. He understands that he has never been tested by someone who refused to play his game. Bruce did not fight him. Bruce rewrote the rules. As the session nears its end, Bruce invites the giant to attempt again, but this time with a constraint. "No rushing," he says. "No force, just timing." The giant nods. He steps in more cautiously, moves slower, tries to observe, and for the first time, he feels it. The difficulty of controlling distance, the frustration of not knowing when to commit. Bruce moves around him, not attacking but shaping the space, guiding the giant into hesitation. The giant realizes how uncomfortable patience is when you have always relied on pressure. They stop. Bruce smiles slightly. "Now you're learning," he says. The giant exhales. He is sweating, but not from effort, from concentration, from mental strain. He bows his head again, deeper this time. Not out of shame, out of gratitude. "I thought being big made me dangerous," he says quietly. "Now I see it just made me loud." Bruce places a hand on his shoulder briefly. "Loud is easy to hear," he replies. Quiet arrives first. The class disperses soon after. Students leave talking among themselves, replaying what they witnessed. The giant lingers. He does not want to lose this moment. He knows that what he experienced today has cracked something open. A belief he built his identity on. And once cracked, It cannot be repaired the same way. He approaches Bruce one last time before leaving. "May I return?" he asks. "To train." Bruce looks at him, reading not his words but his posture, his tone, the absence of ego where it once stood tall. "You can," Bruce says, "but understand something. If you stay, you must let go of who you think you are." The giant nods without hesitation. "I'm ready," he says. Bruce turns back to the empty hall as the door closes behind the man who once mocked him. 4 seconds were enough to end arrogance, but it would take a lifetime to replace it with understanding. The giant returns the following week, not alone this time. He brings no audience, no curiosity seekers, no need to be seen. He arrives early, stands quietly near the wall, watching the room fill. His presence is still imposing, but the way he carries it has changed. His shoulders are lower, his movements slower, more deliberate. He is no longer trying to occupy space. He is trying to understand it. Bruce acknowledges him with a nod and nothing more. Training begins as usual. Warm-ups, footwork, sensitivity drills that look unimpressive to an untrained eye. The kind of exercises the giant would have dismissed before as ineffective, too gentle, too subtle. Now he watches every detail. How Bruce emphasizes relaxation over tension. How speed emerges naturally when resistance is removed. How power appears only at the moment of contact and disappears immediately after. When it is time to pair up, Bruce assigns the giant to work with smaller students. This surprises him. In the past, instructors avoided matching him with lighter partners, afraid of imbalance, afraid of injury. Bruce does the opposite. "Control," Bruce says simply. "If you cannot control yourself, you cannot control anyone else." The giant nods. He moves carefully, and for the first time, he struggles, not physically but mentally. Every instinct tells him to dominate. Every habit urges him to press forward. Bruce's instruction forces him to restrain himself, to feel rather than force. During a drill focused on trapping hands, the giant makes a mistake. He pushes too hard. His partner stumbles. Bruce stops the class immediately. He does not raise his voice. He does not scold. He walks over and adjusts the giant's wrist with 2 fingers. "Too much," he says. "You are thinking about winning. There is nothing to win here." The giant feels the correction more deeply than if Bruce had shouted. He nods and resets. As the session continues, Bruce begins to explain something fundamental. "Most people think fighting is about imposing your will," he says. "That is why size feels powerful. But real fighting is about removing your opponent's options." He demonstrates by standing in front of the giant and limiting his movement with minimal contact. The giant tries to step forward, sideways, backward. Each path is quietly closed, not with strength, with positioning, with timing. The realization unsettles him. His size, once a weapon, has been giving his opponents clarity. They knew where he was going, what he wanted. Bruce gives nothing away. His body is neutral until it isn't. The giant begins to understand why the 4 seconds felt so absolute. There was no battle because there was no confusion for Bruce, only for him. During a break, the giant sits on the floor, towel draped over his shoulders. He watches Bruce work with others and notices something else. Bruce adjusts his teaching to each person. To smaller students, he emphasizes structure. To faster ones, patience. To stronger ones, sensitivity. There is no single system being imposed, only principles being revealed. The giant realizes that his previous training was rigid. One way, one answer. Bruce's approach is fluid. Near the end of training, Bruce invites the giant to move freely. "Not against me," Bruce says. "With me." They circle slowly. No attacks, just movement. The giant tries to match Bruce's distance. He fails repeatedly. Bruce is always just outside reach, then suddenly inside, then gone again. The giant feels off balance without falling, disarmed without being struck. It is exhausting, not physically but cognitively. He has never had to think this much in a fight. They stop. Bruce looks at him. "Do you feel it?" he asks. The giant nods. "I feel lost," he admits. Bruce smiles faintly. "Good," he says. That is where learning begins. That night, the giant cannot sleep. He replays the day over and over. Every correction, every movement, every moment where his assumptions failed him. He understands now that the mockery he began with was not cruelty, but ignorance. He had believed that intimidation was dominance, That reach was control. That mass was inevitability. Bruce dismantled all of it without needing to hurt him. Weeks pass. The giant continues to train. Slowly, his movements change. He becomes quieter, his steps lighter, his reactions sharper. He learns to let attacks miss rather than stopping them. He learns that sometimes the strongest position is not forward, but absent. Bruce never praises him. He never criticizes harshly. He simply guides. One evening after training, the giant finally asks the question that has been forming since that first day. "Why didn't you embarrass me?" he asks. "You could have." Bruce considers this. "Because embarrassment teaches fear," he replies. "Understanding teaches growth." The giant nods. He finally sees the difference. The legend of the 2-meter man who mocked Bruce Lee begins to circulate quietly. But the story changes depending on who tells it. Some say Bruce threw him across the room. Others say the man attacked wildly and was dropped instantly. The truth is less dramatic and far more powerful. Bruce did not defeat size, he exposed misunderstanding. And the man who once believed he was unbeatable begins to understand that real strength is not measured in centimeters or kilograms, but in clarity, timing, and humility. Over time, the giant's presence in the training hall stops drawing attention. At first, people whispered when he entered. The man who mocked Bruce Lee. The one who went down in seconds. But weeks of quiet discipline erase spectacle. He becomes just another student. A serious one. The kind who listens more than he speaks. Who stays after class to repeat drills no one is watching. Who asks questions not to challenge, but to understand. Bruce notices the change, even if he never comments on it directly. He begins to test the giant differently, not with demonstrations, but with situations. Bruce will suddenly stop a drill and ask the giant what he felt, not what he saw. He will ask him where tension appeared first, where balance was lost, where hesitation crept in. These questions frustrate him. He wants answers. Bruce gives him responsibility instead. One afternoon, Bruce pairs the giant with a fast, aggressive student. Smaller, explosive. The kind of fighter the giant would have crushed months earlier. The drill begins. The smaller man attacks quickly, darting in and out. The giant almost reverts to instinct, almost uses size to smother the attack. He stops himself. He breathes. He waits. He lets the smaller fighter overcommit. And for the first time, something clicks. He doesn't dominate. He intercepts. A simple movement. A subtle angle. The exchange ends without force. Bruce watches closely. He nods once. That nod means more than praise ever could. After class, Bruce speaks to him privately. "You're beginning to disappear," Bruce says. The giant frowns, unsure how to take that. Bruce continues. "When you arrived, everyone felt you before you moved. Now they don't." The giant understands. He has stopped announcing himself, stopped leaning on intimidation. He is no longer loud. The giant asks something that has been weighing on him. "Why didn't this work for me before?" Bruce answers without hesitation. "Because you were fighting to prove something," he says. "Now you're fighting to understand." The difference settles deeply. The giant realizes his past victories were fueled by ego. Every fight was a statement, a demand for validation. Bruce stripped that away in 4 seconds. Outside the training hall, the giant's reputation begins to shift. Those who once feared him now find him difficult to read. Sparring partners complain they can't find an opening. They say he feels lighter, quicker, less predictable. Some assume he has learned new techniques. He hasn't. He has learned restraint. One night, after a particularly long session, the giant stays behind to help clean the floor. Bruce remains as well, stretching quietly. The giant breaks the silence. "If I hadn't said anything that day," he asks, "if I had kept quiet, would you have taught me anyway?" Bruce looks at him thoughtfully. "Eventually," he says. "But it would have taken longer." The giant nods. He understands now that arrogance accelerated his lesson, painfully but effectively. Bruce adds something else. "Most people protect their ego at all costs," he says. "You put yours on the line. That's why you're still here." The giant absorbs this. He had thought his comment was his greatest mistake. Now he sees it as the doorway to everything that followed. As months pass, the giant begins helping newer students, not by demonstrating power, but by guiding them away from mistakes he once made. He corrects posture gently, encourages patience. When someone relies too much on strength, he smiles, recognizing himself in them. He never mentions his past. He doesn't need to. The story of the mockery continues to evolve outside those walls. In retellings, the giant becomes a villain, a bully, a brute humbled by genius. But inside the hall, the truth is simpler. A man arrived believing the wrong things. He was corrected, and he stayed long enough to change. Bruce, for his part, treats the giant no differently than anyone else. That consistency becomes its own lesson. There is no permanent hierarchy, no labels, only progress or stagnation. The giant chooses progress every day. Then, one evening, Bruce announces he will be traveling. Film work, commitments outside the school. Training will continue, but his presence will be limited. The room reacts with quiet disappointment. The giant feels something unexpected, urgency. He approaches Bruce before leaving. "I still have much to learn," he says. Bruce meets his gaze. "Then continue," he replies. "Whether I am here or not." As Bruce walks away, the giant realizes something profound. The 4 seconds that ended his arrogance did not make him smaller. They made him precise. And precision, he now understands, is what turns size from a liability into a tool. Bruce's absence changes the rhythm of the hall. Training continues, drills repeat, students push themselves, but there is a subtle tension in the air. Without Bruce's presence, every mistake feels louder. Every correction feels heavier. The giant notices it immediately. Not because he feels superior, but because he remembers how lost he felt before guidance shaped his awareness. He steps in carefully, not as a teacher, but as a stabilizing presence. When students ask him questions, he doesn't answer directly. He asks them what they felt, where they lost balance, what they committed to too early. He mirrors Bruce's approach without trying to imitate him. And in doing so, he understands something deeper. Teaching reveals understanding. Every time he guides someone else, he sees his own gaps more clearly. One afternoon, a new visitor arrives, tall, broad, confident. Not as large as the giant once was in spirit, but similar enough to be familiar. The visitor watches the class with the same amused detachment the giant once carried. He makes a comment under his breath. "Interesting, but not practical." The giant hears it. The words strike like an echo from another life. The giant does not react immediately. He watches the visitor the way Bruce once watched him. Calm, attentive, the visitor eventually speaks up, questioning the effectiveness of what he sees, suggesting that real fights require power, not subtlety. The room grows quiet. Students glance at the giant. They expect him to respond, to defend Bruce, to assert authority. Instead, the giant smiles faintly. "You may be right," he says. The visitor looks surprised, the same surprise the giant once felt. "If you want," the giant continues, "we can test it, lightly." The visitor hesitates, then agrees. Confidence is easier when you believe history favors you. They face each other, no audience hype, no tension beyond curiosity. The visitor steps forward, reaching, testing distance. The giant does not rush. He does not intimidate. He simply adjusts his position. The visitor attacks. And in moments that feel strangely familiar, nothing works. The giant is not faster. He is earlier, not stronger, just present where he needs to be. Within seconds, the visitor stops, not because he is hurt, but because he understands. The same understanding that once sat heavy in the giant's chest now appears on someone else's face. The giant steps back immediately. No celebration, no dominance, just space. "This is what he taught me," the giant says quietly. "It's not about being big. It's about being on time." The visitor nods slowly, humbled without being humiliated. He thanks the giant and stays to watch. The cycle continues. When Bruce returns weeks later, he notices the shift immediately, not in technique, in atmosphere. The room feels steadier, more self-directed. Bruce observes silently as the giant works with others. After class, Bruce approaches him. "You didn't replace me," Bruce says. "Good." The giant bows his head slightly. "I wouldn't try," he replies. Bruce studies him for a moment. "You understand now," he says. "It is not a question." The giant nods. He does. The lesson is no longer intellectual. It is embodied. He has lived both sides of it. The arrogance, the collapse, the reconstruction. Bruce addresses the class one final time before leaving again. "What you saw today and every day is not my art," he says. "It is yours. If you rely on me, you fail. If you rely on understanding, you grow." The words land differently now. The giant hears them not as instruction, but as confirmation. That night, the giant walks home alone. He thinks about the day he laughed, The casual cruelty of dismissing someone without knowing them. He thinks about how easily ego disguises itself as confidence, and how quickly it can be stripped away by reality. 4 seconds changed his path, but not because he was defeated, because he was exposed. He realizes something else. Bruce never took anything from him, he gave him clarity. And clarity is heavier than pride, but infinitely more useful. The giant stops in the street and looks at his hands. The same hands that once relied on force now understand timing. The same body that once intimidated now listens. The legend will never tell this part. It will say the giant was crushed, that he was humiliated, that Bruce Lee proved size means nothing. The truth is more precise. Size means nothing without understanding. And understanding takes humility. The giant smiles to himself. 4 seconds were enough to end a belief. A lifetime will be needed to honor the lesson. Years later, the story still circulates. It changes depending on who tells it. In some versions, the giant is a bully who storms into a training hall and is thrown across the room. In others, he is an arrogant fighter knocked unconscious by a blur he never sees coming. These versions spread easily because they satisfy something simple. They flatter the idea of domination. They reduce mastery to spectacle. But the people who were there remember something quieter, something far more unsettling. They remember how fast the room went silent, how laughter died without being challenged, how 4 seconds didn't showcase power, but exposed illusion. Bruce Lee never tried to prove he was stronger. He proved something more uncomfortable. That most people don't lose because they are weak. They lose because they misunderstand reality. The giant rarely speaks about it. When he does, he never exaggerates. He doesn't say Bruce defeated him. He says Bruce corrected him. He explains that being large taught him the wrong lessons. That strength without timing is noise. That reach without awareness is an invitation. That confidence built on fear collapses the moment fear is removed. He says the most important thing Bruce showed him wasn't how to fight, but how to see. To notice space before movement. To recognize intention before action. To understand that real advantage is not physical, but perceptual. Bruce saw him completely in the first moment. The giant didn't see Bruce at all. People ask the giant what he felt when he hit the floor. He tells them the truth. Confusion first, then clarity. The clarity that comes when a belief breaks and cannot be repaired. The clarity that forces you to either retreat into denial or step forward into growth. He chose growth because Bruce allowed him to. Because Bruce didn't humiliate him. He offered him a mirror. Bruce Lee would go on to become a global symbol. Speed, precision, philosophy. But those who trained with him know the symbol was never the point. The point was freedom. Freedom from rigid thinking. Freedom from ego. Freedom from the need to be bigger, louder, stronger than everyone else. Bruce didn't teach people how to win fights. He taught them how to stop lying to themselves. The giant carried that lesson into every part of his life. Into training, into conflict, into silence. He learned that the moment you believe your advantage makes you untouchable, you become predictable. And predictability is weakness disguised as certainty. The reason the story endures is not because a small man dropped a larger one. That happens. The reason it endures is because it reveals something universal. Everyone has something they rely on too much. Size, intelligence, status, experience. And when that thing is challenged, the ego reacts before the mind can respond. Bruce Lee didn't attack the giant's body. He dismantled his assumption. 4 seconds were all it took because the fight was never physical. It was conceptual. Decided long before the first movement. The moment the giant believed size was enough, the outcome was sealed. Bruce simply arrived on time. And that is the part most people miss. Mastery is not about overpowering others. It is about removing illusions. About seeing clearly when others are distracted by appearance. About understanding that what looks impressive rarely survives contact with reality. The giant learned that lesson in front of witnesses. Painfully, publicly, permanently. And in doing so, he gained something most fighters never do. Perspective, the ability to grow beyond the limits of his own strengths. Somewhere, in some retelling, the title will remain the same. A 2-meter giant mocked Bruce Lee. 4 seconds later, everything changed. But the real change didn't happen in those 4 seconds. It happened in the silence that followed. In the decision to listen instead of resist. To learn instead of deny. Because in the end, Bruce Lee wasn't teaching people how to fight. He was teaching them how to stop being fooled by what they think they know. And that lesson, once learned, never wears off.